I'm Adam. Welcome to Fireground Hydraulics. I've been a driver operator for 10 years, firefighter for about 15, and I teach these things pretty regularly. I always get guys calling me, ask me for refreshers from the classes that I've given in person. And I figured these videos would be a great way for that refresher for whenever they want to access or whenever they want it. That being said, let's get down to some of the brass tacks of what we're talking about here. Why is it important to be accurate as possible with your hydraulics? Because increased fuel loads, modern furnishings, plastics, creating higher BTUs. How do we fight those BTUs? With increased GPMs. So what is the problem with increased GPMs? One, if you have an older engine or a small tank, you're running through your water supply in a significant amount of time. And second, increased nozzle reaction. Nozzle reaction is a real thing. It can be taxing over time, and the guy that's in there in the hot toxic environment getting his ass kicked, he doesn't need his job any harder. So be accurate for two reasons. You're giving him the amount of GPMs that he needs to fight those GPUs, and second, you're not making it any harder than it needs to be by increasing his nozzle reaction. Apologize for the cursing. I curse a lot. I'm gonna try and keep it down to a minimum, but no promises. So the first thing I always teach is the second principle of friction loss. The second principle of friction loss comes straight out of the driver book. And it says, friction loss is increased with the square of the increase of the velocity of the flow. In layman's term, what that means is if you double your flow, you quadruple your friction loss. Now I always try to make a visual out of everything when I'm teaching it, so guys can kind of have that visual of like the engine, the hose line, and the nozzles down there, and start adding it up. We're gonna start off pretty small and simple here. This represents my engine. This represents my hose line. This represents my nozzle. So if I have a nozzle that is flowing 125 GPM at 100 PSI, 100 feet long. With the hose lines that we carry on our department and their coefficients, I'm going to pump this guy at 110. 100 for the nozzle, 10 for my friction loss. If I was to take this, say it's a selectable gallonage nozzle, and I crank it up to 250, so my increase goes to 250, that is doubling my flow. So that original friction loss of 10 needs to be quadrupled. So instead of pumping it at 110, I am now pumping it at 140. 100 for the nozzle, 40 for the friction loss in the line. And it's that simple. Double your flow, quadruple your friction loss. And this also works in the reverse. So if you have, I like to keep some selectable gallonage nozzles on my engine that flow down to 60 and 30 gallons per minute for stuff like little brush fires, trash fires, cleaning off sidewalks and roadways for gross stuff. But what that does, it lets me know how long I'm going to stretch that tank out for. Instead of just giving them full blast pressure, whatever's on my pump chart or predetermined, and not having to think, if I put forth a little bit of effort and get good at this, I can say, hey, I can stretch this out for 15 minutes, 20 minutes. I can give you 10 minutes of water. I can keep those things in my head and know exactly how long it's going to go. So practice, practice, practice. Reps make you strong, so do your reps. I promise it'll get easier over time. But the biggest advantage I found out of the second principle of friction loss is the water left over from a hydrant. And it's kind of how squaring the lines and those other methods that are in the older driver operator book are kind of derivative off of this, but by getting good at this helps you with other calculations on hose lines and 5-inch and 3-inch and stuff like that. So another example being an engine flowing the same road that we had. Length and nozzle pressure does not really matter at this point because that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is water left over. So if this is my intake, and I hook up to a pressurized water source or a hydrant, and I start getting 90 out of it, and I start flowing 250 GPMs, let's say it drops 5 down to 85 PSI. That's my residual. So if I was to double my flow or add another line of the same value, my friction loss, which is how much my intake dropped, is going to quadruple. So, and it comes off of your static. And a lot of guys do get that confused and start to try to take it off of 85. That's a common mistake I see. Just remember, you always start with your static and work off of that. So 5 times 4 is 20. So my drop is going to be now at 70, my intake. We'll say that. How does this work? Try to break down the mathematics of it a little bit for you so maybe you can understand it, and hopefully it helps you later on, because I'm going to try to break these videos down into smaller segments, because honestly when you get over like 7, 8, 9, 10 minutes they get fucking boring and redundant, and I don't want to do that, and people can refresh on the specific things that they want. So second principle of friction loss, again, friction loss increases with the square of the increase of the velocity of the flow. So the velocity originally has a value of 1. So 250 is my value of 1. When I doubled it, I doubled my velocity to 2. I square that and I get 4 times my friction loss. If I was to add a third line of the same amount, my original velocity of 250 is now tripled, so I have to go up to 3 and square it, and now it's 9 times my friction loss. What does that mean on my intake? It's going to drop down to 45. So if you pull up and you see that, and you can figure this out, you can tell exactly, say you don't have colored hydrants in your city. We're fortunate enough to have those, but those color-coded hydrants are supposed to tell you how much water in approximately 500-gallon increments. Don't want to get too technical, but we know $4.99 and $9.99, all that stuff. You can tell if that hydrant is accurate or inaccurate, or if you don't have those color-coded, exactly how much water you're going to get by just sitting there and figuring this out in about 10, 15, 20 seconds once you get proficient at it. Like I said, reps make you strong, so make those reps. So if I was to increase it one more time, add a fourth line, that would be 4 times my original value. Squared is 16 times your friction loss, which would drop me down to 10 on my intake. 16 times 5 is 80, off of 90 drops me down to 10. What it tells me is that this is a orange top hydrant. I'm not gonna get 1,000 gallons out of it. I'm gonna get close. I'm probably gonna get about 850, 875 out of this hydrant, and you'll learn later how to work those numbers to get even more accurate. But double your flow, quadruple your friction loss. So you remember that, you get a step ahead of the game. 3 times your flow, 9 times your friction loss. And remember, friction loss is exponential growth once you start increasing it. Hopefully I didn't talk too fast. Hopefully you figured some of this out. Appreciate your time. Reps make you strong. Go practice.